Good evening and welcome to Behind Open Doors. I am your host, Genevieve, or Jeannie V. I want to welcome you all in the chat and hope that you will enjoy tonight's special guest as we are celebrating and honoring Ace Week to, lift up and celebrate those of our asexual community. We want to be sure that they are recognized as a valid and important part of who we are in the LGBTQIA plus community. So I have a guest tonight who's going to be talking about that. Before we get to that, though, I want to touch on some of the house rules. We want you all to ask questions. That's part of why we do what we do for this programming. We want you to be able to, learn, improve upon your understanding of something you may not get, but we also want you to remember that we are here in a safe space. The space that we are in is trans, non-binary, non-conforming, and intersex positive, because that is who we are about. But we also allow our allies and those who are curious and questioning and who want to discover more. So, this is a safe space for that. It is also a sex and asexual positive space. It is a kink and poly positive space. This is a space where we can all come together and respect one another. So please treat each other with the respect due a fellow member of the human race around you. Third, I want to ask you to treat everybody with love and grace. People who come into the chat, the host, the guests, we all come into these moments with different burdens and different struggles. And sometimes those struggles can come to the surface. So, if somebody seems to be having a difficult time, please treat them with love and grace. Recognize that they need that opportunity to just deal with those big emotions, and that they don't need to have you trying to fix them. They just need you to create space for them. We want you to have conversations. We want you to be free to talk in the community and in the chat with one another and interact with me and the guest. We are human beings, though, who are also sexual beings. Even though we're talking about asexuality, it is an aspect of being a sexual being. And so conversations need to be appropriate. Inappropriate conversation will not be tolerated. The moderators are allowed to rule on somebody's appropriate behavior and statements on their own. They do not need me to call you down. So, if you make statements that are inappropriate, the moderators do have the authority to remove you from the conversation. So, let me just put it this way. If you're going to make a comment, if you're going to try to make a joke, if you're going to try to say something, and you're not sure how someone in the chat or how I or my guest will take that, then I hereby rescind the consent that you have to make that statement. So, don't do those things. Don't say those things. Try not to be a jerk, because we are all just trying to do this as best as we can. So, with that in mind, I want to welcome my guest. You may recognize her from TikTok or Instagram, AsexualMemes. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Of course.
It has been, months since I've been trying to work this out with you to get to this space?
Yeah, I am a famously difficult person to get to focus on one thing in the schedule. So congratulations.
There is nothing difficult about that. I am also one who is struggling to find all of the perfect ways to get things done. So I found it is just easier to say that we are at this moment with serendipity. So
You just have to keep talking to me on like every single place that I could possibly be, and eventually you'll find me.
Okay, I can definitely do that. Talking is not a problem with me. So now your content that you have been doing, now when did you start doing TikTok again? You said February?
Yeah, I think I downloaded the app in February, and I was mostly just trying to learn. And then I had some ideas for like ace memes that I could make. So I started to make them, and I was like, no one's ever going to see these.
Right.
And I think I started like the end of February, maybe early March. And after like, I don't know, 10 videos, maybe, I had one that went like super viral really fast. It was very overwhelming. And I kind of thought that was it. Like that was going to be like a flash in the pan, and then I'd keep making content and it would just kind of go back to the way it was before. But it just kept going and going. And here we are, I don't know, 8 months later, maybe. And I almost have 100,000 followers, which is ridiculous to me.
That is so awesome because, I mean, you've approached it a couple of different ways, and of course, your shirt is the most popular, I'm sure. Aloes, explain yourselves, and I gotta admit my ignorance. So, what is aloes?
So typically, if someone like me who's asexual is using the word allo, we're referring to allosexuals. And that
Okay.
literally just means anybody who's not asexual.
Okay.
So it's just it encompasses all 99% of people who do experience sexual attraction. But people can also use it in, allo-romantic. So I am allo-romantic because I experience romantic attraction. So
Okay.
sometimes people will use allo, it's a prefix, so they'll use
Right.
it for different, the different attractions. When I use it, I'm referring to allosexuals, which is, anyone who's not ace.
So, no, I'm not gonna because I'm gonna get into etymology geekiness, and I don't really need to do that because I have some other questions that relate directly to the subject of asexuality and the celebration and the honoring of asexual members of the community. Um, let's start with the basics. Let's start with the A of the ABCs here. What does asexual mean, and is there as much a spectrum concept related to that as there is, for example, with transgender?
Yeah, so those are both really good questions. So basically, just to sort of set the groundwork, asexuality is broadly defined as anybody who experiences very little all the way to no sexual attraction towards other people.
Okay.
And so those feelings of attraction exist on a spectrum, right? Because some people feel it sometimes and some people feel it none of the time.
Right.
And so anyone who falls in that category that's, experiencing it very rarely or never, they can identify as asexual.
Okay.
So that itself is a spectrum. But the spectrum of asexuality is actually a lot more complicated than just attraction. So first, there's a whole spectrum of somebody's own feelings towards sex.
Right.
And so that can be sex negative, sex neutral, sex positive, or anywhere in between. And that basically just means, when you're talking with people about sex, do you regard it as a good thing or a bad thing? And, as long as everybody is consenting, do you feel like that's a good thing? Mm-hmm. Those are very sex positive attitudes, but that doesn't have to do with yourself. That just has to do with the broader topic of sex. So that's a spectrum, what your attitudes are about sex.
Right.
Then there's the spectrum of your own feelings about whether or not you want to have sex.
Okay.
So you can be completely averse to it, like absolutely not, get that away from me, I don't even want to talk about it. Mm-hmm. You can be kind of indifferent or neutral, where you're like, I don't know, take it or leave it. Like, it's kind of like if your friends are going to the water park, you might go with them, but like you were never thinking about water parks in the first place. And then you can also be favorable towards it. So you can feel like, this is an activity that I enjoy and I want to mm-hmm. participate in. And again, anywhere in between all of those attitudes.
Right.
And then there's also whether or not you engage in sexual activity. So,
okay.
Some aces don't ever want to engage in it, usually because they're sex repulsed, but not always.
Right.
Some may choose to just do it for their partner. If they're in a romantic relationship and their partner is not ace and they want to engage in sex for their partner, mm-hmm. they may do that even though they may not particularly enjoy it or they may be neutral on it. And then some aces can have sex just because they like it and it's fun and it feels good, even though they're not feeling attracted to that person in the first place. And so all of that is independent of whether or not you enjoy sex, because you can have it and not enjoy it, and you could enjoy it but not be having it. So, you factor in all of those variables and you have what I guess you could describe as like the tapestry of asexuality, because it's more than just a simple spectrum, because there's so many spectrums within it,
I love tapestry. That's amazing. Because we're talking about an intersectionality of so many directions in dealing with this subject, because it's not just, when we talk about being transgender, when I talk about being transgender, that is, that has a singular reference point, when dealing with the subject of gender as a correlation of biological experience of sexuality. So, but you're talking about, this is
it's complicated.
I call it fascinating. I don't think it's complicated. I think it's beautiful. And so tapestry is just amazing. That is just a heck of a lot of fun. Now, I'm not going to press you on any of your personal experience or your perspective on that. And you talk about some of that on your TikTok content. And that, I think that if anybody wants to go follow, go over to TikTok, go to Instagram. It's AsexualMemes. It's not that hard to find. M is wonderful in producing that content, so you can find that information. But I am very curious, because in the broader spectrum of the world, let me just say that, some people presume that this is a trauma-related experience. You're not expressing this as a trauma-connected experience, from what I can hear.
No, not in my case.
Okay. So can you kind of share maybe some of your earliest awareness that you weren't connecting with? And I know that I put this in the pre-notes for you, but it's the only way that I think the wider audience can hear this. Can you share some of your earliest moments of awareness for when you weren't connecting with what others were calling normal sexuality?
Yeah. It's funny, because I was trying to figure out, okay, well, what constitutes as like my earliest memory, because I have memories going back to all the way when I was 2 years old, feeling like, the adults around me were, making me feel very bad about myself. Like any exploration of my body was like shameful. And I didn't know why, but I knew that it was wrong. And, I don't know if that counts, because I wasn't feeling anything. I was just a child, and so one of I think the earliest memories that I can think of specifically, I was probably like 7 or 8, somewhere in there, and there was this magazine cover in my house, and it was all zoomed in on this guy's face, and then there was a woman kind of peeking in from the side of the frame, just like whole ass licking the side of his face, like all the way up. And I was so grossed out by that. And I remember thinking, like, why would they put this on a magazine? Like, that's so weird. And I asked my dad about it, and I can't remember exactly what he said. But however he explained it to me, like, it was appropriate for my age, but whatever he said made me understand that was supposed to be like a good thing, that it was like akin to like adults kissing, that it was like, this was a positive thing, and the guy liked it, and like all of that kind of stuff. And I just remember thinking, like, how? Like, how is that something that anybody would ever like? That's so gross. And even like, when I had my first kiss, when I was, I don't even know, like I was probably 12 or something. I don't remember.
Normal ages, yeah.
But it was like, we had to like count down to do it. And then I was just like, okay, what was that? Like, that didn't feel like anything. And so I had a boyfriend at the time that I would like kiss. And then at some point he was like, oh yeah, I want to try it, with tongue or whatever. And I was like, okay. And so we tried it and I damn near vomited in his mouth. It was so off-putting to me.
Oh no.
And I, like, in my brain, I was always just like, oh, I'm too young for this. Like,
right.
I'm sure I'll grow into it, but like, if I had had the language at the time to express that, like, I wasn't feeling what my peers were feeling,
right.
if I had known what asexuality was and had been able to look into it, like, I'm sure I would have figured it out a lot earlier in my life.
Right, yeah. Now, while you were telling the story about the picture, I have to make a horrible confession, and if anybody wishes to judge me, that is completely fine. So my children would not respect boundaries of space. And I found that the only effective way of keeping my children out of my space was to lick them. So it had nothing to do with romance. It had nothing to do with pleasure. In fact, I was the only one that was getting pleasure out of it because I knew it freaked them out. So
that's hilarious. Well, this magazine cover was definitely meant to be sexual.
Okay. So Tyler's, you may recognize Tyler from TikTok, also a content creator. She asked, can trauma mimic ace? Because I hated sex up until a couple of years ago and then realized I really was a sexual person. Now, I am going to make a leap here and guess that you're not a trauma-informed counselor.
No.
Okay. But I don't want to make
answer that question.
But I don't want to make light of this because, I mean, this is an intersectional part, because there are some people who do have trauma response that does lead to asexual response. Can you touch on that any?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because a lot of people tend to think that if your sexuality changes because of trauma or because of your experiences, that it's not real,
right.
Which is weird because, all asexuality means is what it means. It means that you experience little to no sexual attraction. So if that's happening because of trauma and you want to identify as asexual, there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
There are plenty of asexual people like myself who are just this way because we've always been this way, and it's not coming from a place of trauma or from a bad experience. But there are people whose sexuality changes because of that, and it doesn't make them any less what they are.
Right.
There are plenty of lesbians who were, formerly straight and had a really bad traumatic experience and were no longer sexually attracted to men. And so, does that make them any less of a lesbian? Like, no. So anybody's sexuality can change for any reason at any time. And trauma is an example of one way that your sexuality can change, and it doesn't make what your sexuality changes into any less valid. Just, that's your reason.
And for many of us within the transgender community, we understand that to a degree because for some of us, our sexuality does change.
Yeah.
As we transition. And I mean, let's be honest, as we get older, our sexuality changes as hormone levels change over time. And so, yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to say it. It doesn't necessarily matter what is underlying that identification as long as you come to accept that.
Yeah, like, I have red hair. Was I born with it? No. Get it from a bottle, but I still have red hair. There are people who are born with red hair, and then there are people who give themselves red hair. So
I get mine from the mail. So
there you go.
Now, of course, the transgender community is having all kinds of fun trying to find validity and acceptance and just being recognized. What difficulties have you and the rest of the ACE community encountered in trying to educate and inform people of your validity and how you really are just as valid and just as important as anybody else?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's just the sheer number of seemingly insurmountable misconceptions around asexuality.
Okay.
And don't get me wrong, I had all the same misconceptions about it until I was 26 years old. But the difference is, I was willing to learn that I was wrong and learn how I was wrong. And I was open to learning and being corrected. And also because, it resonated so much with me, I did everything in my power to learn as much as I could about it. And I say this a lot, but it took me from the time that I started to think, oh, I think I might be ace, until the time that I started coming out and telling people I was ace. It was like a full year.
Okay.
And I was dating my now husband that entire time, talking to him every day about asexuality. And I had all the questions for him that people have for me now. And, all of these misconceptions that people have about what it means to be ace, I had to unpack all of those and unlearn all of them as well. And so, sometimes when you explain asexuality to people, they get confused, because they think it's a choice, or they think, oh, that's the same thing as being celibate, or, they think of asexual reproduction, and then they're like, wait, you're a human being, how can you reproduce asexually? And then they ask if you're a plant, or they think, oh, you need to meet the right person, or you just haven't had good sex yet, or how do you know until you try it? And all kinds of stuff that all of those things get used against everybody in the LGBTQ community. And we get all of them too. And getting past that barrier can really be a challenge, because people just have their preconceived notions of what it means. And so when you try to tell them, actually what you thought your whole life is wrong, sometimes people don't like to hear that.
Yes. And not only that, people don't like to hear how happy you are once you accept that part of yourself.
Oh, people hate that.
That's the one that I'm finding. I go out here into the world, and it's like, I go dancing down the street with a whistle on my lips, and people are like, how could you stand to be so happy? And it's like, because I accept who I am.
Yeah.
Why don't you try it? So the journey that you made of, I guess, maybe being allosexual in some way to accepting yourself. How did you, I know this wasn't in there, but how did you begin to make that connection to yourself, and where did you even go to find that information?
Yeah, so it kind of came in little bits and pieces, my whole life. I always knew that I didn't feel the same way as other people, but I also had that harmful idea that oh, I'm a late bloomer, and I just have to keep doing it and I'll like it eventually, that kind of a thing.
Right.
And I kept pushing myself into situations and activities that I wasn't actually comfortable with, because I just thought this is what you have to do.
Right.
And I'm sure everybody, goes through this, and then eventually they like it. That's really harmful. I'm hoping I can get to some younger people before they have to go through what I went through.
Right.
And I don't consider myself to have been through any trauma, because it was all choices that I made, but it was definitely traumatizing to a certain extent. And I had a couple of little bits and pieces that started to put the pieces together for me. The first was that I literally had a friend who was like, you're probably asexual. And I was like, ha 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 ha. Just in conversations that we were having with each other about when was the last time you had sex, and how often do you want to have sex, and hearing what my friends had to say, and I was like, I don't agree with them. We also had conversations about how long sex should last, and one of my friends and I were in the camp of it should be like no more than 10 minutes. And then I had a friend who was like, it's got to be at least 2 hours or I'm not doing it. And he was the one who was like, you're probably asexual. And it's like, that's so funny. But, because my brain said asexual equals this, and that wasn't me, I just, I was just like, ha ha ha, that's funny. But the one that really did it, actually it was a couple. I was a huge fan of the Big Bang Theory, which I know is a little bit of a contention in the geek community. So please don't cancel me for that.
I don't cancel here.
I love Sheldon and Amy. Like, I love their relationship. I love everything about it. And, we all knew that like they were headed for the coitus thing, you know, like we all knew that it was going there. And some people were like, really mad because they were like, well, Sheldon's asexual and blah, blah, blah. And I was adamant. I was like, he's not asexual. How dare you say that? Because it's really harmful to the asexual community to imply that like, you're asexual until you meet the right person and blah, blah, blah. And I just like went off on people.
Right.
And like somebody responded to me and they were like, actually, that's not what asexuality means. And they like told me about demisexuality and told me that like there was more to it. And I was like, oh, really? Okay.
Right.
And then I saw a meme on Tumblr that was like a whole checklist. And it was like, can I still be asexual if? And then a whole bunch of stuff like, if I want a romantic relationship, if I masturbate, if I want to have kids, if I've had trauma, and like all of these things. And they were all yes, 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 yes. And then the last one said, am sexually attracted to other people? No. And I saw that meme and I was like, oh, I didn't realize that you could be asexual and still have all of these things. Because I was someone that, I read very adult fiction.
Right.
My whole life. I never wrote it myself, but I always read it. I always had these ships on TV that I loved, and I would always read the fan fiction and all of that stuff. And so I never thought that like I could be ace, because I thought I only knew one asexual person, and she was sex repulsed, and she was like, don't even talk to me about it. And that was my understanding of asexuality. And so when I saw that meme, I was like, oh, wait a minute. That would actually explain a lot, because I've never felt attracted to other people. So if that's the only stipulation, maybe I should look into this. And that is the very long story of how I started to figure this out.
No, that's an amazing story. It's a perfect story because, I mean, it does really, I feel that all of us need to have, as we encounter these transition points, we do need to recognize the steps that we take, because it's not like a switch gets flipped and we're automatically changed. I was fortunate that mine was maybe only 6 months long. Whereas some have been, journeying this whole journey for decades. So, no, wasn't a long story at all. I thought it was an amazing story.
So those are the sort of three little steps that got me there.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Now, there was a little bit of a kerfluffle last week on TikTok. It was a small kerfluffle in one little corner of it, but it was over the subject of what does the A represent in the LGBTQIA plus alphabet mafia.
Sure.
And this is just my take on this. I choose to see the A as representing our asexual, aromantic, and agender siblings. Mm-hmm. But many times, they are the ones that are left out of any discussion of equity. In many cases, they are not, they are not recognized. And one of the things that I would love to be able to accomplish in some small way in this grand idealistic brain that I have is creating a more unified community around inclusion. How do you feel that we, as the transgender, non-binary, non-conforming, and intersex community, and the asexuality and the aromantic and the agender, how can we work together to start building that community of inclusion?
That is a great question that I wish I knew the answer to. I think there's a lot of challenges in the LGBTQ community when it comes to gatekeeping and exclusion and all of that kind of stuff. And it's not limited to aces or aromantics or agender people. You know, people of color are often excluded.
Yes.
People with disabilities are always excluded. Even bisexual and transgender people, as I'm sure you know, are, you know, their gate kept out if they happen to be in a straight presenting relationship,
Right.
which, you know, who you're dating or who you're with doesn't change your identity. So it's kind of ridiculous, especially because the B and the T are right there in the beginning.
Right, exactly.
But I mean, ultimately, like, what we have to do is just understand and focus on our commonalities and the kinds of change that we want to affect in the world. You know, and that's what's going to bring us together. We got to stop focusing on how we're different and who's got it harder. And in the oppression Olympics, you know, it's just ridiculous. Like, being LGBTQ isn't about who's the most oppressed. It's about the fact that we are all people who have been socialized in a world that wasn't meant for us, and having expectations put on us to behave in a certain way, you know, the gender we were assigned at birth, or, you know, heteronormative standards of dating and marriage and monogamy and all of that stuff. And we're all just trying to overcome that. And so when we do all of this stupid infighting and gatekeeping and trying to tell each other, like, who's really queer and who's not, and who belongs in these spaces and who doesn't, it's just stupid. It's just a waste of time. I don't even entertain that shit on my channel. I want nothing to do with it. If I see people talking like that, they just get blocked. I don't have time for it.
Fantastic. I love that. One of the things that we built right into the Transverse was, this is not going to be a gatekeeping community. We don't have a set rule of saying, these are the standards that you have to meet to be transgender. No. In fact, we're very intentional about including that full thing of transgender, non-binary, non-conforming, and intersex, because we want to make sure that we include as many people as possible. It doesn't matter how you define yourself. It doesn't matter how we define you. If you find yourself stuck and you're not all male, not all female, and you don't fit in that space, we want to welcome you here, because this is a place where we want everyone to belong. So I love it that, you know, that's what you kind of see is what needs to happen, is getting rid of those gates.
Yeah. And honestly, like, if I ever see anybody, either in my comments or anywhere else, that I feel like is just misguided and can be, you know, educated, I will always try. Like, I will always put in the effort to be like, hey, like, actually, this is why we're saying this, and this is why we belong, and, you know, all of those things. I will give it a good college try. But I literally one time had somebody that was just digging in about how asexuality wasn't real, and the only reason I was saying that is because I had trauma. And I was like, no, I haven't actually. Like, I know that I haven't, and I know that my husband hasn't, and we're both ace. Like, what are you talking about? And, like, at a certain point, I was like, I can't fight with you anymore. Like, you've made up your mind. This is what you think is the reality, and it's not. And I don't need to engage with you anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you just happened to say something that leads to a very good conversation.
Okay.
You are married, and your husband is in the chat.
Yeah.
And I started following you before the grand trip.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, I would love to talk just a little bit about the romance behind you all.
Sure.
Because you are asexual, but you are not aromantic.
Nope.
So, as we kind of get into this, you know, and understanding that asexuality does not necessarily mean aromantic, I would love to hear your story if you're willing to tell it.
Yeah, of course. Where should I start?
How did y'all meet?
Well, when I first started thinking that I might be asexual, but I just didn't know enough about it yet, I said to myself, I wonder if there's a grinder, but for asexual people. So,
And how did that come out to answer?
well, there wasn't an app, which was the first place I looked. But then, I took to Google and I looked up, like ace dating app or something.
Right.
And I found a website called Asexuality. And it was a dating site for asexual people. And I was like, oh man, this is so cool. And at the time I was thinking, I don't know if I'm ace, but like, this is always like the reason why I avoid relationships. Like I'd been single for 8 years because anytime I started to talk to somebody that I was interested in, I was like, then I got to deal with that shit all over again. Like, I don't want to go there.
Right. Yeah.
So I just, then I would like unintentionally ghost guys and, or they'd ghost me because like they weren't getting what they were expecting out of me.
Right.
So I was like, well, at least if I date someone who's asexual, like, that'll take care of like that excruciating part of dating. And also like, it'll give me an opportunity to like learn more about it and see if that fits for me. And so I signed up for this little asexual dating site and I was like, I did a little bit of searching and there's like nobody on it. It's like a very small site, asexuals are 1% of the population. So if you want someone in your area, good freaking luck. So I did a little bit of searching and then I was like, I don't know, whatever. And I just kind of closed it. And I was like, I'll probably just forget about it. But then I got an email the next day that was like, oh, you have a message from this person on Asexuality. I was like, oh, somebody messaged me. That's cool. And so I went on and it was my now husband. And we just started talking and it was just so clear to me that this was like my perfect match. Like, there's, when you first start talking to people and it's like, oh, what do you like? Oh, I like long walks on the beach, You have like, oh yeah, me too. Like, how do you like your coffee? Oh, lattes? Yeah, me too. But like, this was like the granular level of like, oh, you also made a machinima series with Halo with your friends in high school that didn't actually end up going anywhere? Yeah, me too. That kind of stuff. And so, this was like a Tuesday and we spent the entire day talking. And by the end of it, we were just like, all right, let's get off this site and like move over to Facebook, which neither of us are on anymore. But at the time we were both on Facebook.
Right.
And so we just chatted on Facebook all the time. And it was so clear talking to him. Like I was like excited to get to work because I could like message him,
Yeah.
And so I was going to a concert that weekend and I was like, hey, do you want to go to this concert with me? Because he wasn't asking me out.
Yeah.
He had some rule about waiting 3 weeks or something. So I asked him out, whatever, breaking gender norms. And
you go.
So it just kind of turned into like first it was, okay, let's go to this concert Saturday night. Age of Ultron had just come out. So I was like, do you want to go see that like earlier in the day? So we started with, the Avengers. And then he was like, all right, well then I'm going to take you out to lunch. And so then we had like a lunch planned in the middle and we both love sushi, which was great. So we went to a sushi place. And it was kind of an omen for our relationship because, I bought the movie tickets because I invited him to the movie and he was all mad about it. He was like, no, I'm supposed to buy it. And I was like, no, I asked you to the movies. I'm paying for it.
Right.
He was like, all right, well, I'm taking you to lunch. So I'm paying for lunch. And I was like, all right, cool. And I was like, well, I'm taking you to the concert. So I'm paying for the concert. And then he's like, well, I'm taking you for coffee. So I'm going to pay for the coffee. And like, this has been our relationship for the last 6 years. Like, we are constantly fighting about whose turn it is to pay. And it's the opposite of what most couples argue over. Like, no, it's your turn to pay. No, it's yours. We're the total opposite. We're like, no, remember you paid for this and you paid for that. We're freaking married now. We have a joint bank account. We're still doing it.
Okay, Em, I've got to do this because I believe in fair and balanced shared time because G is saying, okay, it wasn't a rule.
Yeah,
I was told by friends not to ask for at least a week. So I want to make sure that, I know you're reading chat, you're not supposed to be, but I'm not going to get too fussy about that. But I wanted to be sure that G is getting equal air and representation on the show.
That's fair.
So.
That's fair. He still didn't ask me out, so.
He still didn't ask you out. Okay. Hey, wait, don't assume I'm going to get your back, because there may be something that comes out in this that you will also get called out for. So I said fair and balanced on this. So, okay, so the concert.
Yeah, and so this date started at noon and it went until like 10 p.m. And it was just one of those things, like even after the concert, that was kind of the last thing we had planned, but we kind of both were feeling like, I really want the night to end.
Yeah.
So we were like, let's go get froyo. And so we went and got froyo. And he's gonna hate me for this. So we get to the end of the day, he walks me to the door, all of that stuff. I had a roommate at the time who was also my boss, which just, that makes it awkward.
Yeah.
But so he walked me to the door, and like I could tell he was like going for a kiss, but I was like, I haven't dated anybody in like 8 years. I'm not ready for that. Plus my boss is right here, so like, it's weird. So I just like went in for a hug, and I was like, okay, good night. And the next weekend we had our next date, and he tried to kiss me again, and I was like, no. I felt really bad because I wanted to kiss him, but like. Right. It was really scary for me because I hadn't been in a relationship for so long.
Yeah.
So I just talked to him the next day, and I said, look, like, I want to kiss you, and I know once we start, like, I'm not going to want to stop kissing you, but like, I just like, I need a little time, and like, I want it to be perfect. And he was like, yeah, cool, I got you. But then he just never tried ever again. He just gave up. He was like, never going to kiss her, whatever. So that was another one that I had to initiate. He's going to blow up in the chat in about 2 seconds.
Remember those words? I want it to be perfect.
He had this idea of like, oh, the perfect kiss means this. And so he wanted to like, I don't know, wait for like, sunset on the beach or something. And I just meant like, I don't know, a nice time, which is what it was.
Okay. So we have a rule here at the Transverse among the executives, and that is done is better than perfect. It sounds like, G, that done would have gotten you a lot farther a lot sooner.
He had a lot of opportunities, by the way. I'm just going to put that out there. Like, very obvious. But he's kind of oblivious.
I
can say that because I know he's listening.
I resemble that remark, so yeah. Oh, you were trying to be nice because she said that. Oh, okay.
That's been his thing for 6 years. I was trying to be nice. I was trying to be a gentleman.
Okay, so the kiss eventually happens.
Yeah.
And obviously it wasn't a deal breaker.
No, it was great.
And obviously there's been more along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, we got married, so.
Yeah, so how long did you all date?
We were dating, let's see, we started in 2015, and he proposed in 2019. So we were dating for about 4 years before we were engaged.
Yeah.
And then, 2020 happened. We were supposed to have our nice big wedding in Tahiti, and then a pandemic hit, and that all didn't happen.
Right.
But we still, went to the recording office and signed the papers and got legally married.
Okay.
And we had our a friend of ours was legally licensed to officiate, so she did like a little service for us up in LA. We had a couple of friends that were witnesses and like signed the paper for us. So we got legally married on our wedding date in 2020, but we had to push the whole Tahiti thing a full year to this year.
Wow. Okay. Now, when I first reached out to you about being on the show, there was, I got a little thing that I'm going to be gone for a while. And I'm like, I hope it's going to be fun. And you're like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go get married in Tahiti. Oh my God! Is it just from
It's
the
a
pictures?
magical place.
I was going to go there. I am so thankful that you did that. I am a huge, huge Coulson fan.
Oh my gosh, you should see I got some Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. costumes in my room.
No. Oh. We're going to become more friends now.
We're obsessed with that show. We cosplay as Fitzsimmons all the time.
That's amazing because, I mean, they were the heart of that show.
My husband just brought this in.
Oh, Lola too. Oh my gosh. Oh, that's beautiful. So Tahiti. So was Tahiti chosen because of S.H.I.E.L.D. or was it?
Pretty much. I mean, it's funny because, you know, we always talk about how on our first date, we went through all the deal breaker topics, which is typically very taboo. Like, you're not supposed to talk about that stuff.
Right.
But when we were sitting at that sushi place, it was like, all right, here's how I feel about kids. How about you? How about politics? How about religion? How about marriage? And we just covered all of it.
Wow.
And because, you know, you're not gonna waste your time. Like, if someone's like, yeah, I want 5 kids, and you're like, oh, I hate kids, like, then why are you dating? Like, don't even bother.
Right.
So, you know, we covered all of that stuff. We were on the same page about everything, so that worked out. The only thing that we weren't fully on the same page about was when we talked about marriage and a wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you know, I don't really want a big wedding. Like, I don't like having a lot of attention on me. I don't want to have, like, you know, a room full of people like watching me get married.
Right.
Like, that's weird. And he was like, yeah, you know, the perfect wedding would be like go to City Hall and sign the papers. And I was like, all right, well, hold on. that's a little extreme. Which is funny because we ended up doing both.
Yeah.
But it was maybe like 6 months in. You know, we weren't specifically saying like, hey, yeah, we're going to get married. But like, we both kind of knew. But I was like, well, how do you feel about like a destination wedding? You know, like not having a whole bunch of people, but still getting to go somewhere beautiful and somewhere different and somewhere fun. And he was like, yeah, like that, I'd be down for that. And I was like, how about Tahiti? It's a magical place. And it was like kind of a joke, but also kind of not, because it is a magical place.
It's gorgeous.
But that was just kind of our, I don't want to say in joke, but that was just like, that was how we talked about it all the time. Like, Tahiti was where we were going to get married because it's a magical place. So we just went there. But it was definitely because of S.H.I.E.L.D. But you know, if Tahiti was like not a nice place to go, we wouldn't have gone there just for that reason. But, you know, we're looking at these pictures and we're like, oh yeah, we can get married here.
Yeah. And so you have all the plans, you're looking at it, 2020 comes along and basically craters any joy, happiness in the world. Except, you know, for those who can find it in isolation from the rest of humanity. But you decide to put it off for a year.
Yeah.
But was it always, you know, was that always going to be the goal? I mean, you did the thing that, you know, the government says, okay, well, now you happen to be tax burdens to each other.
Yeah, he really screwed up my tax refund the first year, by the way. It's terrible. I was all set to get like $4,000, and then we added all of his stuff, and then it was like, now you owe us money. And I was like, son of a...
All right, G, we need to talk about sort of the burden of what you need to do to balance that one out now. So
no, he's super on it.
Yeah, I figured. Did this is going to sound strange. Did signing the paper change your relationship?
Not really. Because we'd been living together that whole time, and you know, we bought a house together before we got married, and so we kind of did things like out of order.
Right.
You know, and I don't know, signing the paper wasn't really like anything that felt any different, but like we knew we wanted like the big ceremony. Cause like even when we did the little one, you know, with our friend, we did what we call like vows light. You know, it's like we saved our real vows for Tahiti. Like those are the big vows, but like we'll have like little baby vows for this one, like make it special so we don't feel
training vows
super lame. Like, you know, like, oh, this is our wedding, you know, we're standing with a bunch of other people in mass and we're all signing papers. Like it just wasn't, you know.
Yeah.
But we were definitely looking forward to having the real wedding.
Okay. So what did that bring for you, for both of you? I mean, to finally go through that after the waiting, what did that bring out for you?
Well, for me, it meant I didn't have to diet anymore, which was great because I already got my pictures taken. So at that point, I was eating mac and cheese again. So I've already had mac and cheese twice this week. I'm not even sad about it. But you know, it was really hard. Like because back when the pandemic hit, like we didn't know anything, you know, and we kept thinking like, oh, it'll blow over by May. It'll be fine by May. Like we can still go. And it was really hard, like making the decision to pull the plug because like, well, what if it is okay? You know, but like the closer and closer we got to it, at a certain point, their borders were closed and we couldn't get in anyway. So that was kind of the deal breaker. But the other challenge was that we were supposed to honeymoon in New Zealand because New Zealand was like my number one place I wanted to go. And it was pretty high on his list. And, you know, when you're in Tahiti, you're already halfway across the ocean. So it was like, if we're going to go to New Zealand, we should do it like right after.
Absolutely.
And so it was really hard to make the decision to like, all right, we're going to pull the plug on this year. We're still going to get married. That way we can have it on the same day. We'll just move everything a year out and we'll just have our wedding on our 1-year anniversary, basically. But New Zealand didn't open their borders. And so we spent a lot of time trying to figure out, like, are we going to cancel it? Because we booked everything. Because we're like, yeah, in a year, we'll be totally good. Oh, we were so naive. But, you know, it was something that we really wanted to do. And we, like, New Zealand was like our, like, this was not going to be a relaxing honeymoon. This was like zorbing and rappelling and whitewater rafting and glowworm caves and like just like fun like back to back for 2 weeks. And so I really didn't want to cancel that, but at a certain point it was like, all right, well, what are we going to do? Because we just have to assume that this isn't going to be possible, that they're not going to let us in. So we said, all right, forget New Zealand. We'll do that in 5 years or something. I don't know. And we just made Tahiti the honeymoon and just stayed there for 2 weeks, which wasn't too bad.
Not bad. I bet. I do want to, we only have a few minutes left. If there are any questions that are in the chat, if anybody has anything, please drop those in real quick so we can get those covered. But there is, I mean, that right there for me is, in my little brain here, that says to me that your relationship is just as full and meaningful and life-giving. And just because there is one little component that the rest of the world says is necessary, just because that little component is missing doesn't take away from that.
No.
Because as I'm listening to your story, and I hope the chat and anybody else who watches this, as they hear your story, the laughter, the love, the attraction that you have for each other just is so beautiful. And I just want to thank you for coming on and sharing that, because...
Thank you for having me, and thank you for asking me multiple times until you got an answer. That's really, you just got to do that with me. Like, I'm so scatterbrained, I will forget it. I will forget my own name.
That's, I mean, and that's why I wanted to kind of pursue to ask you these questions, because we have people within our community who they understand that they don't fit the I'm just going to say the normie
Yeah.
way of things. But they're afraid, or they're confused, or they feel like they're missing something. And part of having you on the show was just to give others the chance to know that you have a full and meaningful and happy life. And so thank you for sharing that with us.
Of course. I love you how you put that.
Well, thank you.
That was
very
really
much.
nice. But it's kind of like, if somebody was like, oh my gosh, you and your spouse don't rock climb together? Like, I don't understand. Like, you'd be
Yeah.
like, I don't know, it's not important. Like, who cares?
Right.
It's just kind of like that for us. Like, there's a lot of activities that couples could do that not everybody does.
Right,
This
yeah.
is one of ours, so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, M, thank you so much. G, also thank you for being a good sideline participant over there. And I hope that if there is anything that you need from our community, we can be a help to you all. But thank you
Back
so
at ya.
much for being here.
Yeah, it's
Community,
fun.
thank you for being in the chat. Thank you for watching and participating and being great. Just want to let you know, tomorrow night we have the Transgender Show, where our guest is going to be Lady Lexi herself. She is going to be Emily's guest, and she just debuted on Sunday, so we're going to have a great time to kind of get into her story a little bit tomorrow night. So hope you'll come back and join us for that. And check us out at thetransverse.net for more information about who we are, what we do, and the community that we are building. So thank you all very much. M, thank you. You are wonderful.
Thank you. You're wonderful.
Thank you so much. You all have a wonderful and joyful rest of your week. Bye.